Thanks, Cahirlock. Mary Harney, a survivor who will be familiar to many, one of the women the Commission of Investigation wrongly denied her statutory right to comment on the draft findings, once said, "I'm not a survivor. I'm a small yet mighty resistant worker for justice." She has had to spend much of her life fighting for her rights, for her identity, for justice. Unfortunately, this government, like its predecessors, is continuing to force people like Mary to fight in the courts. Thousands of survivors are excluded from the government scheme. Many of them will never receive redress or recognition if the Minister has his way. Nothing for the life-destroying crime of forced family separation. Nothing for those boarded out to abusive homes. Nothing for those who pharmaceutical companies have profited off of. Others will be given as little as €5,000 for a lifetime of trauma. You would get multiples of that for a whiplash injury. It is truly despicable. I actually thought that the 6-month criteria was a red herring to distract all of opposition from the ridiculously low rates that other survivors get. I thought you would go back on that. This scheme is showing nothing but contempt for survivors. I cannot express how, as a public representative, it turns my stomach. The rules of this House prevent me from expressing the anger that I know is out there today from people watching. In your own closing remarks, Minister, you quite perfectly summarised it. You said you wanted to pay tribute to survivors and that nothing can ever actually truly undo the damage caused. But by ensuring that the remains of the children buried at Tuam receive a respectful reburial, and by bringing forward a payment scheme that will benefit 34,000 residents, that you are humbly acknowledging the state's duty. If you are humbly acknowledging your state's duty, you'd have to reword that to ensuring that the remains of the children in all known burial sites around the country would receive a respectful reburial, and by bringing forward a payment scheme that would benefit all former residents. That would humbly acknowledge the state responsibility to some extent. Minister, you are being disingenuous given the incredible, serious and personal nature of this topic, and that is unforgivable. You claim you have listened. That is blatantly untrue. Survivors participated in your consultation. They rightly called for a scheme recognising all survivors. They know how others have suffered. They know the evil of a system that separates them into different categories. The casual manner in which you disregard their wishes is sickening. Minister, you also proudly say you have gone beyond the Commission's recommendation, as if this is an admirable thing. We know the Commission's recommendations were arbitrary and inconsistent with testimony given, not to mind all those excluded from the investigation in the first place. Any scheme based on these recommendations is equally distortive and defective. Minister, you emphasise that the scheme will be non-adversarial, as if this is a benevolence. You tried to set yourself up as the good guy by saying survivors will not have to provide evidence of harm. But of course, this position is based on the fallacy that there are only 2 options open to you. But Minister, you can create a process that recognises harm in a way that trusts survivors. Because that is at the heart of your so-called non-adversarial system, the assumption that survivors would lie. They are being treated in the same way they always have by the same judging and distrusting state. It is all wrapped up in kinder language, but the core prejudice remains the same. Minister, why are you and this government letting the church and pharmaceutical companies get away with this? I know there is a deference to the church in some of the government parties, and the pharmaceutical companies are major employers. But you should be standing up for justice. Honestly, will anyone be held to account for this litany of crimes? Will anybody in the Bon Secours order be held accountable for Tuam? It is an incredibly wealthy organisation profiting from private healthcare here and internationally. Why are you not aggressively pursuing them, not only for accountability but for compensation for victims? You should be giving every survivor every cent that they are owed and that they deserve, and then pursuing the church and the pharmaceutical companies for the costs they bear responsibility for. Not only would it be the right thing to do, the Irish people would be squarely behind you. But no, better to divide the survivors. Better to give as little as possible and hope that this goes away. Well, this will not go away. Your term in office will be marked as another disgrace, another failed minister, blatantly ignoring survivors and disregarding human rights. I had genuinely hoped today would be a wake-up call for the government, but instead it will cynically allow this motion to pass while ploughing ahead with your exclusionary and paltry so-called redress scheme. I, along with others, will fight you every step of the way at all stages of your bill that ignores survivors, rejects human rights and facilitates religious orders and pharmaceutical companies getting away with crimes. This government is no different or better than its predecessors. You have learned nothing. You will not be forgiven.